blessing that I think Roger could tolerate. It's a Bridget's feast, so it's a blessing that's written by Bridget of Ireland. I should like a great lake of ale for the Queen of Queens and the King of Kings. I should like a table of the choicest food for the family of heaven. Let the ale be made from the fruits of faith, and the food be forgiving love. I should welcome the poor to the feast, for they are God's joy. Let the poor sit with Jesus at the highest place, and the sick dance with the angels. God bless the poor, God bless the sick, God bless our human race. God bless our food, God bless our drink. Oh God, our Roger, embrace.
My name is Roger O'Neill. Age, how old am I? 83. Today's date is July 29th. 31st? No.
31st.
Oh, it is. And we're in Manhattan. Father of the two interviewees.
So did you want to start with your stories that you were telling before, or shall we start with some of these questions?
Well, just to finish your story, it dawned on me that your mother went down to Trenton once, participate in some sort of labor march. I don't know what else it would be. And King was going to be there. She had met him in his first talk in New York City. Yeah.
Dad is referring to when I had walking, holding hands with Martin Luther King in that demonstration.
And your mother may have moved you in that
Yeah, a little
direction.
black boy in his other hand. Oh, she definitely did. She positioned me, and she ran alongside saying, yelling at me and embarrassing me, so that I would remember. That's Martin Luther King, Terrell, that's Martin Luther King. Who did you interview Siobhan to?
This gunner who happened to live in the Bronx, married. He was Irishman born in Wales, but he was the head IRA guy over here.
Well, maybe we can segue, Dad, and kind of talk a little bit about, your pretty incredible career being a political activist. We thought maybe we could start kind of with your early childhood.
My father and uncle was slightly isolationist in the Second World War. And my father was what you'd call a distributist, neither socialism nor capitalism. And he had some books around the house that represented that.
How old were you when you came down to New York City?
I'm a little confused there, whether I was 17 or even 19.
Okay.
And you heard about the Catholic worker?
Well, my father brought the paper home, and I looked it up in the library.
Tell us about your first impressions when you went down to Catholic Worker on the Lower East Side.
Well, I hit the work when I found out I blended in very easily. Exotic food, Italian bread, and peanut butter. I roomed across the street with a guy with liberal, an ex-reporter. I don't know why he was around the worker. He may have been an alcoholic, but I don't remember that. And I don't know who was paying the rent. But he knew Chinese.
Oh, really? What would you do?
I remember painting a woman's apartment. Someone was hitting the internet for me, and they had a quote by Dorothy. I was the youngest and the hardest worker. But that was easy work, moving. I wasn't driving.
I believe it. I want to ask about meeting Mom.
Yeah.
At the worker, where she was this X9,
Yeah.
all the way from Canada.
I don't
Heard
know.
of that.
Yeah. I remember spotting her
Oh, you did?
in the corner of the office. Other than that, I don't know if I knew she was coming, if I knew anything about her. And
Was she a volunteer there as well? Or how
yeah,
did
she must have written to come down. And the next day I became aware that she went to the local Jesuits to ask what the story was about the worker. Because this guy, Hennessy had asked her to pick at the some office in the Empire State Building.
Aaron Hennessy.
Yeah, almost before she put down her suitcases. Yeah, even if she read the paper closely, she wouldn't know how they treated new people and what they asked of new people. Was this a test? I don't know if she paid much attention to Hennessy's writing.
What did she see in you, Raj?
I would say I had a lot of competition. By chance, none of them were solid.
When Mom talked about how she fell in love with you, she always told the story of you helping clean off, she had painted when she got into the
Something
work
about
because it
painting her
was
room.
stingy, and you helped, you cleaned the paint off her hands with Vaseline.
Oh, Roger, I never
It
heard
was a
that.
sensuous caring woman.
I remember something about her painting her room, yeah, and helping.
Can you tell us, Roger, a little bit about kind of your decision with Mom to go to the community in New Jersey, to leave the Lower East Side?
It had been a cooperative, and a print shop and a craft shop.
And you put out a paper. What was it called?
A libertarian press. And slowly it became a formal community.
Who was living there when you went out there?
The Dellingers.
Was it partially that you wanted to raise a family in the country? Is that part of the reason you got it?
There were no married couples at the worker, so that meant you'd be,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
and we always thought of you'd be coming back to the city. There was some communal interest, there was a magazine being published, but no active people. This looked like the only chance to experience a community that was very involved in the movement and was close to the Calgary worker.
If you look back on the experience of the community, what were some of the successes?
We made a deed out to God, it was unusual. And theoretically, the kids could inherit it if they, or anyone else could inherit it if they wanted to live the principles. Principles were mostly just passives.
So it wasn't voluntary property, it wasn't?
No.
There wasn't. So Roger, there's a belief that the shop was broken in by the FBI and that our phones were tapped, but you
Now you're
disputed that.
touching on,
That's the family lore. What's your
well, I'll say something serious. I don't think that's true. It was easy to assume that. The time when Dave was sent a bomb through the mail,
Yes, I remember that.
that made him jump to the conclusion when the shop was,
broken into?
apparently a couple of bombs exploded in the mail.
I see.
And they say his didn't go off because it was, it got slowed in the Christmas mail and the batteries died. Sounds a little, you children may have been in the car coming up with that bomb, I forget. He was picking up the school kid. It was wrapped like a whiskey bottle. It had a funny address on it, but it could be a friend, Dave Viet Cong Dellinger, or something like that.
Can you tell us, Roger? Because, you have been at the worker really many, many years, thinking of back.
Well, longer than anyone else.
Can I ask you, Roger, because I know we don't have a lot of time left, about kind of as years went by and, as some of the sad things happened in the community, if at all, you got disillusioned.
As a young guy, I thought as I got older, I'd hit different communities.
Yeah.
Whether that still held that value for me. It'd be interesting what I would have done if the house didn't burn.
Yeah, you would have stayed.
Stayed, and wouldn't have got involved with the younger crowd in the Bronx. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Depending if I went back to work at the Times, I wouldn't have how much time I would have had.
Well, tell us about that, about coming back, because then you returned to the worker eventually
Yes, and
to volunteer.
over 20 years later.
What seems different about people today who are homeless?
Early on, I think people stayed for very short periods of time because they want to go out and get a job. And there was no one on SSI. And the houses doesn't allows people to get checks and keep their money, so that has changed the nature of why people stay on.
So we're gonna move on, because we're
Yeah.
wrapping up for this interview.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what are you most proud of, Roger?
Most good? Proud.
Yeah, when you look back.
No, I may have hung around the work just to make sure I was kind of have a grasp of something. Although I paid a lot of attention to other movements. what was going on in New York. I feel sorry I haven't kept up with the others. But,
How do you want your grandchildren to remember your legacy,
oh,
Dad?
my legacy. Subtle things that have happened over the years is people project amazing crimes on other people. As Chomsky says, especially when he's on the West Coast, the amount of energy that goes into conspiracy things is killing the movie.
So stay away from conspiracy theories. Just do the good work.
Do the deed.
Is that the legacy for your grandchildren? Should they become activists?
Well, I'd say,
Rather than
and I was shocked.
paranoids.
Avoid paranoia.
I love
Avoid-
that.
yeah,
That works.
Avoid paranoia in print, yeah, you might be
Okay.
able to say.
That's a good message, Dad. I want to ask a question, but I know you're in the middle of a thought. Just how you would like to be remembered.
Oh, how I would like to be remembered. The guy that put off death for a century and a half.
Put out what? Death. Deaths? Deaths? What?
I want to thank everyone for gathering today to celebrate my father, Roger O'Neill. His long pacifist, activist, and Catholic worker member, devoted husband, father, and grandfather. We are deeply moved by all of your support, condolences, and outpouring of love and Irish storytelling on behalf of our dad. The Catholic worker was in many ways as much his true family as his two daughters were, and his extended family. Siobhan and I are indebted to your unwavering dedication, unconditional acceptance, and care of our father throughout his long sojourn and return to this holy, humble place. A fitting refuge, an honorable end for our dad. Thank you, Joanne, Jane, Carmen, Jim, and of course Teresa, and many, many more that I cannot begin to count today. It all began at age 17 when Roger fled Boston and arrived on the Bowery back in the late 1940s. After almost a decade of serving the poor, attending labor, civil rights, and peace marches, he met and fell in love with my mother, Mary, who was a nun and co-volunteer. The rest is a very rich history that led them to St. Francis Community in New Jersey, where I grew up. Many of you already know this part of our background, and Siobhan, my sister, will elaborate. But for the next few minutes, I'd like to just share some other personal stories of Roger. I should have known that Roger's treasured papers might come in handy one day, and they have. So, Roger O'Neill always believed in the rigorous pursuit of dialectical truth, the logical, yet often meandering discussion of opposing ideas, opinions, and forces. So, in the spirit of Dad, here we go. For a man who lived very simply, my father was profoundly complicated. He was filled with contradiction and complexity. He was exceedingly humble, raised in a modern working-class Irish Catholic family in Dorchester, Massachusetts. His scrappy, red-headed mother, Honora, was an orphan teenager who narrowly escaped the potato famine that ravaged her farm on the barren island of Lettermore off the coast of Galway. She sailed to America on one of the last voyages of the Lusitania before it sank in 1915. His father, Robert, was a first-generation erudite public servant who was the first to introduce my father to the Catholic worker paper. His own paternal family descended from prominent poets, songwriters, and political activists in Macroom, County Cork. My father was actually never one to promote himself, and he rarely revealed the fact that his paternal great-grandfather, Lord Mayor of Cork, Terence McSweeney, died a political prisoner and martyr, fighting for Irish freedom in 1920 after an 80-day hunger strike in London's Brixton prison. Clearly, the passion for living by one's principles was genetic. Roger was the seventh of 8 children. His beloved youngest sibling, Kevin, died at the age of 6 after falling off the family deck. My father always blamed himself for giving Kevin a toy to play with that rolled too close to the edge. The truth is that Kevin survived the fall and was recovering from his injuries in the hospital when he contracted a fatal case of pneumonia and died. My father, nevertheless, carried a lifetime of regret about this loss and never really forgave himself. All of his older brothers served in World War II and became rather conservative, traditional police officers, mailmen, and small business owners. Roger, meanwhile, was the black sheep, prodigal son who left the familiar streets of Boston for his calling to serve the poor and pacifist causes on the gritty streets of the Lower East Side. Roger never finished high school, but he was an avid reader like his own father. His fund of knowledge, regardless of how relevant, rivaled that of many a professor. In fact, when he worked at the New York Times years later, many of my friends' parents who met him for the first time assumed he was a journalist and not a hands-on printer in the printing press. He would correct them immediately, and sometimes sharply, to my chagrin, because my father actually took pride in being a laborer and a union worker. His righteous humility would always humble me in the end. My dad was the definition of stubborn stoicism, a public enemy of capitalism and consumerism. Yet Roger collected everything, filling rooms, floor to ceiling. He never let go of his precious junk, without a fight, that is. His temper was notorious during my childhood and adolescence, but it softened considerably with age. It did rear its head recently when he comically tried to choke my sister Siobhan for committing that heinous act of decluttering his room. Needless to say, Siobhan laughed it off and lived through it. He was a teetotaling, recovered Rachel-holic, but devoted pacifist, and yet IRA sympathizer you would ever meet on the picket line. Roger's devastating character assassinations were invariably eclipsed by his reverence for the downtrodden and his ability to see the good in every single human being. He truly valued the weak and disenfranchised above all others. I remember walking down the block outside here, the worker, to get coffee with him. And along the way, he would, without fail, stop and introduce me to his homeless comrades. My father was skeptical to the core. He was plagued by cynicism and cursed with tragic events. Yet somehow Roger was a dreamer, and he always believed in love. He was a hopeless romantic as well as idealist. On one of his first movie dates with my mom, he turned to her and he wept at the cornball ending. I think between that sweet, tearful moment and the story shared earlier on the audio of gently washing the paint off my mother's hands, my mother was all in. Who could blame her? Roger always did love going to the movies, whether surrounded by all of his grandchildren at the holidays, to see The Arrival this past Thanksgiving, or to see the Angela Davis film, accompanied by his devoted friend Teresa, the night before he died. Despite Roger's darkness, he also could be incredibly lighthearted. My first memory of Dad was him on all fours, chasing me and my sisters around the floor, playing Monster, grabbing our feet and tickling them with his scratchy 5 o'clock shadow. I will never forget helping him in the garden, listening to him wax poetic about how to grow that perfect Jersey tomato, or his simple tender kiss on my forehead in times of despair and loss, to which there were many. He was so overjoyed when he walked me down the aisle, looking like a dashing leprechaun wearing a tux, perhaps for the very first time in his life, actually, cracking inside jokes to settle my nerves as we strolled. For better or worse, Dad was both father and mother to my sisters and me since our adolescence. He was heartbroken and lost when my mother died over 40 years ago from a motor vehicle accident, and once again he blamed himself for this unfortunate event. For a man who was known for his words, they failed him that horrible Valentine's night. He could not bear to break the news of her death to his daughters, and through tears struggled to tell us while turning the pages of beautiful art books. Somehow we all survived that terrible event with the divine intervention of Mary Sheehan and the support of our dear friends the Carharts. Our group finally healed. There was the house fire 5 years later, leaving our family homeless. But once again, generous friends and the Jerry Mooney gang from the Bronx came to our family's aid. After this bad luck, I did have the unique privilege of living in a dilapidated barn with my dad for months, with no working plumbing. Talk about rustic conditions and living simply. Let's just say I was slightly more reluctant than he was at 17 for a life of volunteer poverty. But good thing, we both love peanut butter. That really helped me stick it out, my dad. This challenge, the loss of our home, forced Roger forward. It broke his grief of living in the memories of the past, and he returned to live in New York and resume his work in activism and his future. Roger's resilience has never ceased to inspire me. In the wake of Ulyssian losses, like the untimely death of his oldest daughter, Terrell, from cancer 5 years ago, I feared for sure that his spirit would finally be broken. I am still haunted by the sound of his anguished wail when she took her last breath. His heart was deeply wounded, no doubt, and he suffered a serious stroke a few months later, but Roger rallied and recovered, even if he was never quite the same. Well, like Roger, I can ramble on, so I'm going to try to wrap it up now. I just want to say one last goodbye, Dad. I didn't have the chance to do it in person. Thank you for showing me how to embrace the contradictions of life and to reconcile angels